Today on the table we have the COYOTE DTC8 for pre-connectorized splitters. For this build we're going to be installing a 1x8 SC-APC splitter. All COYOTE DTC8s are made to order products. Knowing this, I should have the pre-selected grommets and organizer for my application right in this kit. Okay, so now I'm going to go over kit contents for this DTC8. So I'm going to cut open the box. So when I open the box, I should get the installation instructions, the closure itself. So this will come with the hinged collar, the cover, the organizer for my application. So this is the splitter organizer, the base, the end plate, and I will get a small parts bag. So in my small parts bag, I have the adapters I pre-selected, my grommets for my feed cable. I also have my grommets for any drop cables that I'm bringing in. So there should be a total of 8 grommets because this is a DTC8. I also have cable restraint hardware in here. So we should be able to start building. Okay, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my box down, my cover, my collar, and my end plate all off to the side. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my base and my organizer. So this organizer is for splitter applications. You can see on the side here, it's kind of sub-assembled, so it's taped together. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the tape before I install it into the base. Now there's tape on both sides. Keeps it safe during shipping. Okay. So this organizer has a couple of different areas. It's got the adapter bulkhead right on top here. This hinges open, and I've got my splicing tray is next. And then the splice tray with the adapter bulkhead all come off of the slack storage area. So I'm going to set the top 2 pieces off to the side because I'm just going to deal with the slack storage area first. And I'm going to go ahead and open my small parts bag here. And what I'm looking for in my small parts bag is my hardware bag. So I've got my feed grommets, my drop grommets, my adapters, and my hardware bag. So in the hardware bag, I will find a smaller bag with some screws and some bolts. So that's what I'm looking for. Everything else can go off to the side. I'm gonna go ahead and open this and grab 2 screws. So I'm going to install my slack storage tray into my base of my DTC8. As you'll notice in the bottom of the DTC8 base here, I've got a grid-like pattern for my screws. So I'm going to take this piece, set it in here, and line it up with the holes. So I've got it lined up, it's kind of centered, with a hole here and a hole here. So I'm gonna go ahead and secure it with my screws. So I put one in, tighten it down a little bit, and then I put the other one in just to keep it aligned. And then I'm just gonna tighten these all the way down. Okay, so now my DTC8 base is ready for my cable to be installed. So I'm gonna set this to the side and go ahead and grab my cable. All right, so the feed cable I'm going to be using today is a 48 count cable. I've got this one already opened here. So we're gonna be doing an express loop here. And we're going to be window cutting one of the buffer tubes because I only need 1 fiber out of my buffer tube to feed my splitter because it's a 1x8 splitter. So I already measured my cable, but I just want to double check here. So this cable, I'm going to take my cable measure tape wrap it around my cable, pull it tight. And this cable measures about 0.38 inches in diameter. So my grommets that I pre-selected when I ordered my closure should be for that range. Now, these grommets don't tell me which range they are, so I have to refer to the ordering instructions to make sure that these are correct. So I've got 4 of these grommets, another cable measure tape, 2 packs of lubricant, and some plugs. So because I've got this pre-opened to my express loop, what I'm going to do is pretend that my cable stubs keep going out. So I'm going to have to slit these grommets to put them on. To do that, there are 2 ways. I usually use snips to do it. It's a little bit easier than a utility knife, but you could use a utility knife. I take my grommet here and I'm going to slit it on this side here all the way through. So just mark it a little bit so you can kind of tell where the slit's going to be on 2 of them, because my express loop is 2 cables. I'm going to take the grommet and insert my snips into the hole and snip all the way through the grommet. Now the other way you can do this is you can take your utility knife with the sharp blade, put it on your line, and push all the way down. Gets the same result. I just think the snips are a little bit easier. So once I've got those grommets slit, I'm going to go ahead and install them on my cables so I can go ahead and put it in the closure. So you'll notice on these grommets there is a, I'm going to call it a foot or a smaller portion of the grommet. That smaller portion is actually going to be facing outside of the closure. So when I install this on my cable, I'm going to make sure that it's facing towards me and not towards the inside of the closure. So I'm going to put them on. So the foot is facing me, not towards the inside of the closure. I'm going to grab the other side and do the same. So the foot's facing me, not towards the inside of the closure. And then with the other 2 grommets, I do have to install them because I need 8 total grommets in this closure. So I'm not using these right now. So I'm going to go ahead and put a plug in them to install on top of these 2 once I get them in the closure. So I've got those 2 ready to go in. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and grab my closure. So on the DTC8 here on the table, we've got these 2 outside ports. These are where my grommets are going to go, down here at the bottom. I've got these 2 larger ones and these 2 smaller ones. So typically the 2 larger ones are for your feed or branch cables. The 2 inside smaller ones are for your drop cables, your flat drops, your pre-connectorized drops. But you configure your grommet or your closure kit for the grommets you need here. So I've got these 2 large grommets for my feed cable, so they're going to go in these outside ports here. So I'm going to start by grabbing some silicone lubricant, which came with my grommet kits, and I'm going to put a little bit on the outer surface of my grommet. So when I do this, I don't need a ton, just a little bit, but I want to make sure that I do not get it in this slit line that I created on the side here. So I'm going to pinch my grommet together and put the lubricant on the outer surface on all 4 sides. So once I've got it lubricated, I can go ahead and install it into the closure base. So I'm going to go ahead and push that down a little bit. So to restrain my cable in this base, you'll notice this post down here. That's where I'm going to capture my strength member in this closure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of move my cable in and out of the closure a little bit just to get it lined up. So I want it to be about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of sheath opening from the inside wall of here to the top of my sheath opening here. So between here and here, about a finger, maybe, you know, a little bit more than a finger. And what I'm gonna do is trim my strength member. So this is my central strength member, right at the end of that post. So now it will fit in that post there. So now that I've got my strength member trimmed, I'm going to go ahead and push my cable all the way down into the pocket. And I'm going to grab a cable restraint cap here, which was in my small parts bag. And I'm going to kind of put my strength member on that post and put a cap on it, just like this. And then I'm going to take a screw and secure that cap to the slack storage. So take my screw, put it through that hole in the cap, and tighten it down. Now this prevents the strength member from pistoning inside the closure due to climate changes on the cable. So I'm going to go till it gets tight, and now my cable's in there and I don't have to worry about my strength member pistoning inside the closure. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. When I go to install the other half of my express loop, what I'm going to do is lubricate the grommet again. A little bit of lubricant, making sure not to get it in the slit line. So pinching that grommet together and applying it to the outer surface. All 4 sides. And then I'm going to kind of get my strength member in a good spot to be secured. So there was a spacer tube in between my brown and my blue tube here. That's where I'm going to put my strength member through. That way I can get a good grip when I put it underneath the cap. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the grommet pocket. And just like the other side, I'm going to go ahead and pull the cable out a little bit to leave 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch here of jacket into the closure. And then I'm going to move my tubes to the side and trim my strength member right at the end of the strength member retention post in the slack storage. So once I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and grab my other cap, strength member cap. Might be a little hard to see. I'm going to separate the tubes a little. Hopefully we can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to push this grommet all the way down to the bottom. I've got my strength member underneath this cap, and I'm going to go ahead and secure the cap with a screw to the slack storage. Okay, so both my feed cables are secured in the closure. Alright, so now that my express loop is secured in the slack storage area, I'm going to go ahead and separate the tube that I'm going to take to the splice tray from his friends, or the ones that I'm going to store in the slack. So the blue tube is the one I'm going to take to the splice tray. So it's separated completely from his friends on one side, but on this side it's still kind of attached, which is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the side that's fully separated. I'm going to do one loop here in the storage. And then I'm going to do another loop. Then I like to alternate this. So because the blue tube is still attached on this one side here, I'm going to go ahead and take the blue tube through one loop in the storage. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so that is one full loop, and now what I'm going to do is go ahead and continue with the other 3 tubes in that loop and just alternate it. So there's that one. So there's one loop. I'm going to grab this side and do a loop. Now when I do this, I want to make sure that I'm not applying too much pressure to my tubes because I don't want them to kink. And I want them to maintain the minimum bend radius as well. So I'm going to go ahead and keep storing this. The last loop here. Make sure all of my tubes are underneath the fingers here in the slack storage area. Okay. So now what I have is I've got this one side here who comes in, goes once around, and then we'll go up to the splice tray. So I'm going to do the same on this side. I'm going to go around the storage area once just so it matches with the opposing side. So there's one full loop. And then I'm going to route both tubes underneath this finger at the top here before I come to the splice tray. Okay, so now this is ready to go to my splice tray. Okay, so now that I have my blue tube with my fibers to be spliced to my splitter separated from the rest of the slack storage, I'm going to go ahead and grab my adapter bulkhead and splice tray. So for today's application, we are going to be installing 4 SCAPC adapters right in the bulkhead here. So these are duplex adapters. So I'm just going to take the adapter and go ahead and push it into the slot of the bulkhead. And when I fully install it, I should hear a little bit of a click. I'm just going to do all 4. Okay, so now all 4 adapters are installed. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this cover. So to get this cover off of the splice tray here, it's these 2 legs here. You just push them towards the adapters and it will come up. So it's on a hinge. Now this is my splice tray. So I've got room down here to store pigtails or bare fibers, or in our case, dark fibers. I've got 2 splice tray blocks here. So I've got, in my kit, it comes with 2 12-count single fusion blocks and then 1 splitter block here. So because I'm going to be using a splitter, I'm going to go ahead and pre-install these. So I like my splitter typically to be on the top position. So I've got this splitter block I'm going to install. If you look at these blocks, I've got these 2 little feet on one side and a bigger foot on the opposite side. So I typically start with the 2 little feet and I go ahead and put those in the slot that's in the splice tray, and then I'll push it so the big foot snaps all the way in. So that's where my splitter is going to go, and then my splices, the splice block gets installed the same. So 2 little feet first, and then you'll just push it in. So for this next step, there's actually 2 ways to do this. So we're going to do it one way first, then I'll show you how to do it the second way. So at this point, what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and put this splice tray on my slack storage. So I'm just going to go ahead and snap it in here. There's some feet on the side, so I should just snap into position. So now that I've got the splice tray on and my adapters in the bulkhead, what I can do is I'll take my blue buffer tube and I need to bring it to the splice tray. So if you look in the tray here, I've got tie wrap slots here and here. So that's where I'm going to secure this buffer tube for my window cut. So the first thing I typically do here is I'm going to grab my Sharpie and I'm going to mark. I want to try to keep the bend radius at a minimum of 30 millimeters here. So I'm going to mark right where my tie wraps are going to go. So here and here. Now I'm going to put some blue felt on it, but for right now, that's where my tie wraps are going to go, in that general area. And then what I'm going to do is mark where I need to window cut this buffer tube. So I typically go about 1/4 of an inch past my last tie wrap slot, so about right here. And that's where I'm going to start the window cut. So once I've got those marked, I'm going to do the other side. So my tie wraps are going to go here and here, and I'm going to open the tube here to expose my bare fibers. So once I've got that, I'm going to grab my window cutting tool and I'm going to find my window cut mark, which is this last one here. Stick it in the correct position here and start the window cut. So I just want to window cut it all the way to this side where I've got that marked. Okay, so now that I've got my buffer tube split, you can see that my bare fibers are already starting to be exposed. So I'm going to go ahead and ring cut my buffer tube at my mark. I did that side, so I'll go ahead and do the other side as well. Okay, then I'm going to remove the buffer tube to expose my fibers. So it looked like I didn't window cut all the way here, so I'm just going to carefully trim off the buffer tube on this side. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I've got a piece of water blocking tape in this buffer tube. I'm going to remove it. It just gets a little bit messy with it in there. So I'm going to carefully cut that one out. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and secure my buffer tube to the splice tray. So before I do that, I'm going to grab a little piece of felt here and going to wrap it around my buffer tube where the tie wraps are going to go. So I usually just do one full wrap on the buffer tube, and then I'll trim it. Creates a little bit of a cushion for when I secure it to the tray using my tie wraps. I'll do the same on this side. Okay, so once I've got my felt on my buffer tube, I'm going to grab my tie wraps. Now I've got 2 slots per tube here, so I need a total of 4. All right, So when I secure this buffer tube, I'm going to swing it over here, keep the minimum bend radius in mind here, and I'm going to install the tie wrap through the slot. And then I will take the buffer tube and secure it with the tie wrap. So you don't want to over tighten these, you just want them to be snug just to keep the buffer tube on the tray. So those are, buffer tube is snug there, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the tails off. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to install the tie wrap and the second one. Bring my buffer tube in. And secure to the tray. Okay, so now that we have that done, what we could do is take our bare fibers and store them because they're just going to be dark fibers in the tray. You could also install your splitter at this point. I've got a 1x8 SCAPC splitter here. This was ordered separately from the DTC8 closure. So I'm going to go ahead and take it out of the box. Being mindful of the bare fiber here. Okay, so here's my 1x8 SCAPC splitter. I've got my connectors on this end are numbered 1 through 8. So what I can do at this point is install the splitter. So let me just move my bare fiber so it's a little bit out of the way here. So I've got the splitter block is up top here, so I guess I can figure out which way I want this to go. With the bare fiber coming on the left side or the right side, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to have it come in on the left side here. So I'm going to install that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the outputs on my splitter and get them plugged in up here. So when I look at this bulkhead here, you know, I could start with one here, I could start with one here. It really is based on your company's best standard practice. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. So I'm going to remove the dust cover caps on my adapters. And then I'm going to determine which output I want there. So I'm going to put 1 and 2 on the bottom here. So let me find output number 1. So output number 1, take the dust cover cap off. Now at this point, I'm not going to clean these. You should follow standard company practice here and plug them in. All right, so now that all of my outputs have been plugged in, you can kind of see I've got them in 2 groups here. I've got the first 4 over here and the second 4 over here. That is because when I route in this splice tray, what I'm gonna do is take this first group, or the group on the left, and I'm going to route these pigtails underneath the fingers over here, and then I'm going to do the opposite with the ones over here. This is so when the bulkhead hinges, it won't catch any of these output legs in the tray. So once I've got those, I can go ahead and get those stored in the splice tray. Being mindful of the splitter's bare fiber here. So I'm going to take these 4 and store them. And then I'm going to take these 4 and do the same. So I'm going to route them so they store in the same place as the first 4. Alright, so all my splitter output legs have been routed and stored on this half of the tray. I've got everything in there nicely. Now there is ample room in here to reverse route if you needed to. But I kind of like to keep everything a little bit separate. So my dark fibers will be on this side and my outputs for my splitters will be on this side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get ready to store my dark fibers. So I know that I've got my input for my splitter is going to be over on this side, on the left side. So it's going to come to the right side of my splice block. So I need my input fiber from my input buffer tube to come from the left side of the splice block, so kind of they can join. So I'm going to find the apex of my fiber here, and what I'm going to do is cut the blue fiber right at the apex. And that is what I'm going to be using to splice to my input on my splitter. So roughly the apex. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find that fiber, the blue fiber that I just cut, and I'm going to separate it from the rest of the fibers in the tube, because this is going to be spliced to the input of my splitter. So now that that's off to the side, what I can do is go ahead and store the rest of my fiber. So I'm going to route in this tray, bring everything over to the right side. You could go on the inside of here, but I'm trying to keep the bend radius on this fiber a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to go ahead and store my fiber on the right hand side of the splice tray. Okay, so now that I have all of my dark fiber stored on the right side of the tray and my outputs of my splitter on the left side, I can go ahead and get ready to complete the splice. So I typically start with the feed fiber. I'm just going to store it, you know, probably once or twice on the right side before I bring it up to the splice block. Just keeping in mind that, you know, in case of emergencies, you might need a little extra fiber. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So then I'm going to go ahead and trim it, or I could store another loop just to bring it to the splice block to be spliced. So I'm going to set that there. And then I'm going to uncoil my input for my splitter and do the same thing. So I'm going to store some of it in the splice tray before I bring it up to the splice. My input from my splitter, we're going to bring it to the opposite side of the block here. So I'm going to go ahead and get that routed. Okay, so once I feel like I've got enough loops or enough fiber stored for my input of my splitter, I'm going to bring it up to the splice block where I'm going to perform the splice, and I'm just going to trim it just so it's not as long before I complete the splice. So this is one way that you can install this splice tray with the adapters and your splitter before I move on to, completion of the splice. I'm going to show you an additional way that you can do this. So let me move this off to the side. So a secondary way that you can do the same thing we just did is what you can do is take your splice tray and your adapter bulkhead, and you can pre-install your splitter into the splice tray before you put it in on top of the slack storage and secure your buffer tube. So that's what I've done here. I've taken my 1x8 splitter, I've routed them to the adapters, I've cleaned them, I've plugged them in, everything is good. I've got my input leg for my splitter is still right here. So what I'm gonna do at this point is I've already measured my buffer tube. It's gonna be at the same measurement as it was before, and I've already window cut it. So I've already exposed my bare fibers. So what I can do now, because my splitter's already installed here, I can go ahead and put this on. Being mindful of the input bare fiber here for the splitter, I'm going to do the same procedure I did before. So I'm going to take some felt and apply it to my buffer tube at the tie wrap locations. There's one side, do the other side real quick. So once I've got the felt on, I can go ahead and grab some tie wraps. And what I want to be mindful on if I do it this way is I've got my output legs for my splitters here, and I've also got my input bare fiber. So I kind of want to start on one side and kind of hold my bare fiber off to the side a little bit just so it doesn't get in the way or pinched. So install my tie wraps here. And take my tube, bring it up, and tighten it to the tray with my tie wraps. Cut the tails off. Do the same on the other side. So being mindful of the output legs on my splitter here, install my tie wraps, take my tube to the tray, and secure it. Then I'm just going to cut the tails off again. So now I can do the same thing I did before. I can go ahead and route all of my fiber and go ahead and complete the splice. So I'm going to go ahead and find the apex of my blue fiber here. Now this one I did a little bit differently, so my bare fiber on my splitter is actually on the right side instead of the left side. So what I'm going to do is start by pulling out the blue fiber on the opposite side, which in this case would be the left side. And then I'm going to go ahead and store all this. Alright, so now that my bare fiber is stored, or my dark fiber is stored on the left side, my outputs for my splitters are on the right side. I'm going to go ahead and just get everything ready to be spliced in the splice block, similar to the application we just did. Okay, so now that we've got the fibers routed to the splice block, we can go ahead and complete the splice. So I've got one that's already spliced. Let me go ahead and grab it. So this one has the splice already completed, as you can see here. I've got my dark fiber on the left side here and my outputs for my splitter stored on the right side. I've got all my connections here. They've been clean scoped per my company's practice, so those are good to go. So I can get ready to button up this closure. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring this adapter bulkhead down, make sure it's snapped into place. And if I needed to gain access to any of the storage, any of the stored buffer tubes underneath, I would simply push on one side of the organizer. So I'm gonna go to the right here, and the finger here should come off the slack storage pretty easy. So you just push to one side and then lift up on it, and you can gain access to the storage underneath for any of your buffer tubes that you might need if you've got damaged fiber in the splice tray. Now, in your small parts bag, as you noticed in the splice tray, as I started routing this, it does get a little bit of a small space. So there is a fiber pick here, so you can go in, there's a pointy end on one side that you can pick out the fibers that you need, or there's a hook on the other side that you can hook out the whole bundle. This is actually stored right on the top of this adapter bulkhead here. So it just snaps in, just like that, and then you can remove it and, you know, get your fibers out of the tray. So before I put the cover on and get this all tightened and secured, I'm gonna make sure that my splice tray stays secured here and to prevent tampering with. So I'm gonna grab a screw, and you'll notice right here on the bottom, closest to where my cables come in, I've got this hole here. That's where I'm gonna go ahead and secure the splice tray to the slack storage tray. So I'm just gonna tighten this down. This prevents the splice tray from really moving. So if you have to gain access to anything underneath, you would have to take that screw out because now it's stuck. So at this point, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and close the closure because my splitter's been installed, it's been spliced. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I do have empty grommet ports down here. So I need to fill those. So I'm gonna grab my small grommet bag here. So I should have 4 grommets. These grommets were for the drops that I might be bringing in later or right now, but we're not doing it right now. And then I'm going to grab the 2 larger grommets that came in the kit we used for the express loop. And I've got plugs in these express grommets already. So I'm gonna go ahead and put lubricant on them. You just wanna go on the outside surface. You don't need a lot, just a little bit on all 4 sides. and then I'm going to install them. So there's one large one. And the second large one, making sure that the foot of the large grommet is towards the outside of the closure, not facing in. Okay, so once those are in, I'm going to go ahead and populate the two small grommet ports here. So I've got 2 grommets for each port. I'm going to go ahead and plug these because I'm not adding a cable just yet. So I've got plugs that came in the grommet kit. The plugs can be removed when I add a drop later. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and lubricate these all 4 sides, and then I'm going to install them. So similar to the large grommets, these have a foot on the one side, so that foot's going to be facing outside of the closure. These grommets also, the small grommets also have a flat end and then an end that's not flat. So what I'm going to do is put the non-flat end in the bottom. So at the very bottom is going to be the non-flat end, so that way the 2 small grommets flats go together. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in. So the flat end is towards the top, but the foot is towards the outer surface of the grommet. I'm going to repeat this step for the remaining small grommets here. So I've got the foot that's going to go outside the closure, and the flat is going to go on the top. Push it all the way down. And then when I put the ones on the top layer here, it's going to be the opposite. So the flat is going to be towards the bottom. So the flat is towards the bottom. Last grommet here. The flat is going to be towards the bottom. So now I've got all of the grommet ports are populated. I've got 2 in each of the ports. I've got 2 large ones on each of the outside ports and 2 small ones on the inside ports. So the next thing, once we've got the grommets in, we're going to go ahead and grab the end cap, which is this guy right here. So what I'm going to do with this guy is I need to pre-install the bolts. So in the small parts bag with the screws, I've got 3 bolts here. They just go, so there is a top and a bottom to this. The top is sort of flat, where the bottom has this lip with like a rubbery substance on it. So I'm going to install these bolts starting with the plastic side, or the non-rubbery surface. So I'm just going to tighten these. So there's a spot where it will just snap into place there. So I just want to do all 3. Okay, so now that I've got all 3 bolts pre-installed, what I'm going to do is flip it over, And I'm going to apply silicone lubricant along the surface where the bolts are sticking out, along the sides as well. So you don't need a ton here, just a couple of dabs. And I'm just going to spread it out with my finger. You want to make sure you get the entire surface though. So in front of the bolts, behind the bolts, all the way. Okay, so once I've got that on, I'm going to bring my closure over. And sometimes if the grommets don't have cables in them, they kind of pop out because of the lubricant. So I'm going to put this one back in. I kind of want to push them down a little bit before I install this. So push them down. Make sure they're all lubricated. They all have plugs in them before I put this down. So I'm going to take this end cap and flip it back over so I can get the hex head of the bolt, and it actually goes on so the curve is away from the inside of the closure. So I'm going to line up the bolt holes with the inserts in the base, and I'm going to tighten these down. So I can use a screwdriver. I like to use a can wrench here. I find it a little bit easier. So I'm going to start with one side, and I'm going to just go down evenly across the board here. So you just want to make sure all 3 bolts are tight. And you want to make sure that it's fully seated. So there is a ridge that runs across the top of the end cap and the top of the base. You want to make sure that it's kind of level. And you also want to make sure that your grommets are compressed. So they look like they're bulging out in certain areas. So that's how we know it's good to go. All right. So at this point, I'm ready to put the cover on. So I'm going to grab the cover and the collar. Now on the cover here, I've got this overmold that runs the entire surface of the cover. So before I install this, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I lubricate all the way around. So that one requires a little bit more lubricant than the grommets and the end cap, but you want to make sure you cover the entire surface. So I kind of spread it around in the packet, and then I will go in with my finger and spread it a little. Now you might have to add a little bit more if you can't cover the entire surface with what you put on there. So I'm going to need a little bit more right on the top corner here. You want to make sure that the entire surface is shiny and lubricated. Okay, so it looks pretty good to me. It looks like I got all the surfaces here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just make sure before I put this cover on that everything is nice and buttoned up. I don't have any loose fibers hanging out over here. I don't have any buffer tubes that are caught within this ridge here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the cover and I'll flip it over and go ahead and put it on. I'm just going to set it there for right now. So once that's on, what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab the hinged collar. So the hinged collar here, the top of the collar has the tether on it. So I'm going to remove one of these pins. So once I've removed one of the pins, I can open the latch. So once I've got that, what I'm going to do is right at the top of the base here, there's this feature here that holds this hinged collar in place. So what I'm going to do is install that first before I secure the cover to the base with the collar. So on the collar back here, you'll see like a T-post right here. So I'm going to put that through the slot in the base here. So once that's in place, I'm going to grab my can wrench and give this a quarter turn on top. So that hinge collar is now attached to the base. It's not going to go anywhere. So now I can go ahead and close this up. So I'm just going to push it on so it captures the cover to the base here. And you should get it all the way closed here. And then I'm going to secure the latch and close it with a pin. So now we're going to go ahead and add a pre-connectorized drop cable to this guy, seeing it's got a splitter already. So I'm going to go ahead and take the cover off by opening the collar. So I'm going to pull the pin there that secures the latch. Go ahead and open this collar and take off the cover. So I want to be careful because this cover is lubricated. I want to try to keep it as clean as possible. I also want to check to see when I go to reinstall it if it's dry and it needs re-lubricated. So I'm going to put that off to the side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a pre-connectorized SAPC drop to one of these adapters here because I just added a new home in the neighborhood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the end cap here. So I'm going to loosen the bolts. Now you don't have to completely remove the bolts from here, you just have to loosen them because they are captured within the end cap. And once again, the end cap is lubricated, so I want to try to keep it as clean as possible. So I'm going to put this in my cover off to the side. Next is I'm going to be adding a pre-connectorized drop cable such as this one here. Now when I ordered this closure kit, I made sure that I knew the diameter of this cable so I could go ahead and already have the grommets that I needed in this closure when I constructed it originally. So I've got my grommets here. So I'm gonna take out the grommet that I need, which is going to be this 2-hole smaller hole. Now I could go from the very bottom here. I'm just gonna add it to the top one. It would be the same principle if you wanted to add it to the bottom layer. So what I'm gonna do is take out the plug. Now you might need needle nose with this because there is lubricant on your grommet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slit this grommet. So similarly to how we slit the large ones, it's going to be done on the side of the grommet. So I'm going to go ahead and mark where I need to slit this guy. And I'm just going to take my snips again, put them through the grommet, and snip the grommet, making sure that the cut is clean and all the way through. So now that I've slit this grommet, I'm going to go ahead and put it on my cable. So my grommet's on my cable. I'm going to make sure that my grommet If it needs more lubricant, gets applied, making sure not to get it in that slit line that I just made. So I'm going to squeeze that grommet together, make sure that the lubricant doesn't get in there, and then I'm going to reinstall that in the grommet port. Now there are two ways that you can route your drop cables. What I can do here is I can pull back this cable and just plug it in, or I can go all the way around the closure to give myself a little bit more slack inside for this drop cable. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to loop it around the top side of this closure just to show you, and this is how you would do pigtails as well. So like if you were going to hard splice pigtails instead of using a splitter, you could also do that. So I'm just gonna make sure I've got enough cable here to loop around. So I'm gonna loop it around here, go underneath this finger here, and go to here, but I need a little bit more. So that looks like it should be enough there to come into this connection port right there. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to secure this drop cable, because I think I have enough length here to get to my adapter here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab one of the two metal brackets that came in the small parts bag here. So I've got the 2-prong one is used for just the two small grommet ports here. The 4-prong covers the entire top row, so all 4 grommets can be used with this one. I'm going to go ahead and just grab the 2-prong one. So what I'm going to do is take some felt here. I'm just going to cut it off of my strip, and I'm going to kind of eyeball where I need to put it. So this cable restraint bracket slides within this channel right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to eye up where my tie wrap is going to sit on this bracket, and I'm going to put some felt there on my cable. So it's going to be about right here. So now that I've got that, what I'm going to do is take my bracket and stick it on top of my cable here, and I'm going to secure the cable to the bracket loosely with the tie wrap. You don't want to go super tight here. There is a little bit of cushion with the felt. So that's secured there. Cut the tail off. Now at this point what I'm going to do is this bracket is going to slide down the channel a little bit as I compress this end cap. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first before I go routing my drop all the way. So I'm going to make sure that my end cap is lubricated enough. It looks clean, there's no debris in it. I'm going to add just a little bit more here just to make sure it's good. And I'm going to reinstall it. Just tighten the bolts down just like we did before. So you want to go evenly across the cap. Okay, so now that that end cap is secured, I'm going to go ahead and route my drop. So, you know, I've got it coming to this side because it's going to get plugged in right here. So to keep it on the sides here, in the small parts bag, you'll get these little Velcro strips. So I'm going to pull 2 of them off, and I'm going to put them together, and this just will create a loop. So once I've got them stuck together here, I'm going to feed them through this channel on the side, and I'm just going to create a loop. So I'm going to take my drop, put it through there, and just secure it loosely in that Velcro loop. So it should look something like that. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to take the Velcro strap, peel them apart, stick them together. The distance doesn't really matter here. And then I'm going to put them through here and run my drop through there and create a loop. Now, if you only have one drop such as this, you might only need one of these. You don't necessarily need to, but just in case you've got, 8 drops running in here, you might need this big loop. So now that I've got that in place, I'm going to remove the dust cover cap from here. And the dust cover cap from my drop cable. I'm going to clean it and scope it and make sure that everything is good, but for the sake of this, we're just going to plug it in. And now that house is connected. So now that I've got my drop cable secured in there, it's plugged in, everything is good, I'm going to grab the cover, make sure that it's lubricated and that the lubricant is clean of any debris. I'm going to go ahead and put the cover on the base. And then I'm going to secure the cover to the base with the collar here. I'm going to secure the latch so the collar stays together, and then secure the latch for safety with the pin. And that completes the build of the COYOTE DTC8 with the pre-connectorized splitter.